Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of LLF Online hosted by the Lahore Literary Festival. My name is Iman Omar, and it is my great pleasure to be introducing Ameena Hussein today, who we are welcoming for the very first time here at the LLF. She is a writer and co founder of Perera-Hussein Publishing House, the front runner for a cutting edge fiction for emerging and established authors in Sri Lanka. She is the author of a short story collection as well as two books, the latest, which is Ibn Battuta in Sri Lanka, which was nominated for the Gratian Prize in 2020. Apart from being an author and running a publishing house, Ameena Hussein also campaigns avidly for a greener environment and has coconut and cashew farms in the northwestern part of Sri Lanka. She resides currently with her husband in Colombo. Thank you so much for being here today, Ameena.
Thank you so much, Eman. It's a great honor for me to be part of the Lahore Literary Festival. I've actually been there in 2019, totally fell in love with the city. So I look forward to coming there, in person after this crazy time is over. So
Yes.
hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me. And I'd like to start. I have a shortish, longish Zoom presentation, and I'll do a few readings.
That's fine. But before you start, I'd like to say that this is a live session, and so feel free to drop in any questions if you may have them along the way.
Yeah, please do send in questions. That's the best part of having a
Over to you.
session. Thank you. So, hello again, everybody. And the name of my book, as well as the presentation, is Chasing Tall Tales and Mystics, Ibn Battuta in Sri Lanka. So I want to show you this sign, and this sign is what started me on my mad, crazy journey. And I will read a short passage to kind of put this whole thing in context. So this is how my book starts as well. Purple pedal pushers and a blue calico shirt and pink rubber slippers were perhaps not the ideal clothing to wear when visiting the Grand Mosque of Putlam. But it all happened so fast. One minute, I was seated chatting to my fertilizer dealer. The next minute, I was scurrying behind him across the road to the entrance of the mosque. But my story really begins a year before. One day, while we were at our coconut and cashew small holding in Karadipuva, 13 kilometers north of Puttalam, my husband Sam returned from a trip to town with a surprise gift. The grainy street sign on his camera screen proclaimed an unexpected name, Ibn Battuta Street. For the longest time, I had been fascinated by this 14th century medieval Moroccan traveler who had visited the island of Lanka. Except for brief and cursory references to his stay here, he's all but disappeared from our history books. The street sign galvanized me into action. If there was a trace of him in Puttalam, surely there would be other such traces elsewhere, and I was determined to find them. And that's how I decided to look for Ibn Battuta in 21st century Lanka. So let me introduce you to Ibn Battuta a little bit. He was a 14th century Moroccan traveler who, in my mind and in my opinion, is the greatest traveler of all time. You can see from the map, he went from one end of the Muslim world to the other end, which was China. He made it a point to never repeat a route twice. And he went to Arabia, he went to East Africa, he went to West Africa, he went to Turkey, he went to Spain, he went to India, and he went to Indonesia, and he went to China. And then he returned back on an entirely different route. Many times I have been asked, what did the 14th century look like? And actually, when I began my investigations, even I was surprised. This is what the 14th century looks like. And this is what the 14th century looks like. As well as this. This is my favorite image because the mosque is made entirely out of mud. It existed during the time of Ibn Battuta and it still exists. and it is a functioning mosque. And of course, I have to bring Sri Lanka in as well into the 14th century. And this is a jewel in the crown of temples. It's the
Ameena,
Lanka Tilaka.
I'm so
Yes.
sorry. We can't see your presentation. You might want to share your screen.
Oh dear. I thought I did. So
That's
let me,
okay. You can do that.
okay. Let me see how I can get out of it. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's fine now.
Okay, so I'll start from the beginning and then you can just see the images. So this is the street sign that I read about. And then you have, this is the map of Ibn Battuta. I'm just going to minimize it. So this is the map of Ibn Battuta's travels. And then, as I said, I wanted to know what the 14th century looked like. And this is what it looked like. So this is the Duomo in Milan. This is the Alhambra Palace in Granada, also from the 14th century. And then we have, as I said, my favorite building, which is the mud mosque in Mali, which still exists. It's made entirely of mud and is still functioning as a mosque. And then you have the Lanka Tilaka in Sri Lanka, which is built on top of a rock. And it has an amazing view. And it is actually the jewel in the crown of all temples. Now, it's very interesting to see the routes that Ibn Battuta took and the Silk Route. You would see that it mirrors very much because he was actually traveling on the land Silk Route as well as the maritime Silk Route. And you can see very clearly that Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it says on the map on the right side, is very much on the maritime Silk Route. Now, why was Sri Lanka important to travelers and to traders? So it was important and famous for gems, for the pearls. We had one of the finest pearl fisheries in the world, for spices, but actually we were more famous for this sacred mountain. And this is the reason why Ibn Battuta came. So the original name of the mountain is Samanalakanda. Today it is called Sri Pada, and Ibn Battuta knew it as the Mount of Serendip, but today we call it Adam's Peak in common parlance. Ibn Battuta began his travels at the tender age of 21 years. He left all by himself. I'd like to read his first diary entry when he left. He says, "I set out alone, finding no companion to cheer the way with friendly intercourse and no party of travelers with whom to associate myself." He records that he cried and that the leader of the caravan and the other companions consoled him and said, "We were like you too when we started, and we are now your family." So this is, as I said before, it's the extent of one man's odyssey. He leaves Morocco at the age of 21. He returns at the age of 50 after having traveled for 29 years. When he comes back to Morocco, the king asks him to write his travels down, which he does, and he calls it a gift to those who contemplate the wonders of cities and the marvels of traveling. But we shorten the title to just the Rihla, which means travels. And you can see it has been translated into French, into Dutch, into Spanish, into German, as well as into Sinhalese. And this is the Hollywood version of Ibn Battuta. We don't really know what he looks like, but this is what people have composed that they would like him to look like this. So his full name is quite a mouthful. It's Shams al-Din Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Battuta al-Lawati al-Tanji. And it is a sentence because Shams al-Din means son of the faith, and it was given to him after he returned to Morocco when he had brought fame to the country. His eldest son was Abdullah, and so he's called Abu Abdullah, meaning father of Abdullah. Muhammad was his given name. Then he's the son of Abdullah, who is the son of Battuta from the tribe of Lavati from Tangiers. which means that if he went anywhere in the world and he said his whole name, he could find compatriots who belong to either his tribe or to his country or even to his extended family. Almost everybody knows Marco Polo, but I realize that in Sri Lanka and perhaps outside as well, not many people know the extent of Ibn Battuta's travels. So I did these charts as a comparison. So you have Marco Polo doing 24 years of travel compared to Ibn Battuta doing 29 years. And while Marco Polo traveled a measly 20 countries, Ibn Battuta doubles that to 40 countries. And Ibn Battuta just takes off with 117,000 kilometers compared to Marco Polo's 24,000, which is why I consider him, and I'm sure you would too after this presentation, as being the greatest traveler who has ever lived. So he leaves in 1325 on the 14th of July, and he goes off specifically to do the pilgrimage of a lifetime to Mecca, Arabia. So as I said before, he leaves at the age of 21. He takes 16 months to do it. So from Tangiers, he goes on to Tunis, and then to Cairo, then Palestine. Then he goes to Lebanon, where he meets the emir. And that is the first sign that Ibn Battuta wanted to make powerful friends. And so with an introduction from the emir of Lebanon, he went on to always be introduced to courts. He goes on to Damascus, and from Damascus, he gets to the city he wants to go to, Mecca. He stays here for 3 years. He's doing pilgrimage as well as he's studying and being a scholar and making himself, a superior jurist than when he left. One of the traits that happened in the pilgrimage is that every evening you had the storyteller's corner, and people from all over the world would settle in a corner and tell stories from where they came, the wonderful travels they encountered, and the marvels of their country. And when Ibn Battuta heard all these tales, he was filled with a desire to travel. And he decided then that he would go to the end of the Muslim world, which was China, which had a fairly large population of Muslim travelers and traders. So from Mecca, he travels to Persia, then he goes to Constantinople, he goes to Uzbekistan, he goes through Afghanistan. One of the puzzles of Ibn Battuta's travels is that he makes no mention of the Bamiyan Buddhas, which he would have crossed any which way that he had to enter India. And then he comes to India. He arrives in India like a prince. He has chests of robes gifted by all sorts of other rulers. He has 1,000 horses. He has many slaves. And when he gets to meet Sultan Tughlaq, he's considered a dignitary. The Sultan invites him to become the chief Qadi of Delhi, and he stays in Delhi for 9 years. But he never loses sight that he actually wants to go to China. So what he does is he after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, he drops hints, nothing happens. So eventually he has to resort to strike. And he leaves the court and he goes into a cave and he lives like an ascetic for a few months. And then the Sultan relents because he's a favored courtier and then says, okay, you can go as my envoy to China. So his route to China first takes him to the south of India, where he has to take a boat. But Ibn Battuta is a distracted traveler. And so when he's in the south, he hears that the Maldives it's easy access to go to the Maldives. And he decides, okay, I'll just hop a boat and go and visit the Maldives because it's a newly converted Muslim country. It's barely 200 years that it became Muslim. So in August of 1344, so he goes to the Maldives. He stays there for 9 months. He marries 8 wives there. He has a great old time there. But the trouble with Ibn Battuta is he's also a political meddler. And so he meddles in the politics and he has to flee. When he flees, he chooses a ship at random, and then a ship that's leaving the Maldives, and off he goes. He's expecting to go back to the south of India. But what happens was, he believes that the pilot is completely inexperienced. The pilot's name is Ibrahim, and he has, very scornful words about his skills, and they get caught to a storm. The Captain Ibrahim is unable to pilot his way through, and after 9 days of being in the storm, they suddenly see that they are close to land. And because they see this mountain, which Ibn Battuta recognizes as the Mount of Serendip, rising into the heavens, he says, like a column of smoke, they understand that they are now on the shores of this land, Serendip, or Lanka, or Sri Lanka, as it is called today. Now, when Ibn Battuta gets to Lanka, all is not exactly well. He lands in Puttalam. So now, and Puttalam is where I have my cashew and coconut farm. So actually, it had this whole trip had a very special place in my heart for it. Now, rumor, legend, tall tale claims that the Grand Mosque is built on the site that Ibn Battuta landed on, but we do not know for certain. What we do know is that the mosque is built on a 15th century site, but this building is about 18th centuries, and it is actually a copy of a famous mosque that is in Alexandria, Egypt. So when Ibn Battuta lands in Puttalam, they're really frightened to come ashore, because the ruler of the king of Jaffna was Arya Chakravarti. He was a ferocious and a powerful ruler. He was also rumored to be a kind of a sea pirate, in that he would accost ships and take them over. So Ibn Battuta, being the seasoned traveler that he is, tells the sailors, don't worry, put me ashore. I can get access to the king. And when he gets to shore, he's asked by the courtiers, who are you? And immediately he says, I am the brother-in-law of the king of Malabar. He's very cunning when he says that, because he knows that if he drops names, Arya Chakravarti will not take ownership of their ship. Their ship will be safe, and the goods will be safe, because the king of Malabar is much more powerful than Arya Chakravarti. So the king asks him to come to court, and then the king actually likes Ibn Battuta, invites him to stay with him for 3 days, and then asks him what he wants as return. Ibn Battuta observes that when he's sailing, when he's going to meet the king, that he sees the whole of the coasts of Lanka covered with cinnamon trees. And actually, this is so important for us, because it's the first instance where we have a medieval traveler citing the instance of cinnamon trees that are being traded, because traders came from the Malabar coast and they exchanged for the cinnamon trees. They left baskets and cloth. Now, the other important thing is that the king and Ibn Battuta spoke in Persian. I was very struck by that, because I had not known that before. And I believe that Persian was like English of today. So Persian was the trading language, it was the language of religion, and it was the language of many courts. So it's natural that Arya Chakravarti would understand Persian. Ibn Battuta loved luxury goods. So he was very observant of what he saw in Arya Chakravarti's court. He saw many pearls, and Arya Chakravarti gifted him some pearls, and he saw rubies, huge rubies. And when he told Arya Chakravarti, these are amazingly big rubies, Arya Chakravarti said, these are small ones. I have much bigger ones up in Jaffna. So when the king asks Ibn Battuta, what can I do for you? You have pleased me. You have told me many stories. I want to reward you. Then Ibn Battuta pulls out his trump card and he says, I want to do pilgrimage to the blessed foot of Adam, which is on the Mount of Serendip, which is Adam's Peak or Sri Pada. And it also shows of how people traveled, because when you went to a place, you could not go straight to the king and say, hey, king, I have come. I want to do pilgrimage to Adam's Peak. You actually have to, there's a protocol. You cannot enter the land unless you are invited by the king. Likewise, you cannot leave the land unless you're given permission by the king to leave. So this is Ibn Battuta's journey in Sri Lanka. You can see that it's a bit of a circuitous route. He could have easily gone to Adams Peak, which is in the middle of the country, and returned the shortest way. But remember his motto, never to travel the same road twice. And he also decided that this would be a good way to see the country. So he goes from Putlam, he goes all the way down to Adams Peak, he climbs Adams Peak, comes down to the southernmost point, which is Devinora, and goes back through Gaul, Colombo, and back to Putlam. What does he say about the country? He speaks of elephants. Ibn Battuta has one marvelous story about elephants, and then he observes that all the while he's going on the route, he sees lots of elephants. His marvelous story is that there were a group of pilgrims somewhere in the 8th century who came to climb Adams Peak, and they got lost. They were a group of Muslim pilgrims. They got lost in the jungle. When they got lost, they were really hungry and they were starving, and they asked their sheikh if they could kill a baby elephant and eat it. The sheikh said, no, I do not give you permission. But they went ahead and they killed the baby elephant. In the night, the elephants came while these pilgrims were sleeping. And then they sniffed each pilgrim, and those who had eaten, they killed, and those who hadn't eaten, they spared. They put this one particular elephant, put the sheikh on top of its back, and went and brought him to safety to the village. And from then on, the villagers respected the Muslims and hosted them in their houses and fed them all on the way that they did their pilgrimage. So he talks about a white elephant that is adorned with a large ruby. He speaks about the women being adorned with gems, sapphires, tourmalines. They wear them around their necks, their wrists, their anklets, and their ankles, and the king's concubines wear a net of pearls on their head. And he talks about hearing of a type of monkey who behaves like a human. And actually, Ibn Battuta scholars believe that he was talking about the Aboriginal people of Sri Lanka, the Vaddars. He also talks about how he went up the route. So he says you have to go the hard way, the more difficult way, which is called the Baba route. And then you come down the easy way, which is called the Mama route. And on the way up to Adams Peak, they stayed in caves, they drank water from streams. He's the first ever person to describe the rhododendron tree, which covered the slopes of the mountain. And even though Marco Polo mentions the chains that you use to climb Adams Peak and the rock-cut steps, Marco Polo never came to Adams Peak. So Ibn Battuta is the first person to have actually written about climbing them. He says there are 10 chains and it's a really frightening experience. And that when you climb the last chain, you're so petrified. He calls it the chain of the profession of creed, because you're constantly reciting the Shahada, because all the pilgrims thought that they would die when climbing that chain. He stays 3 days on the peak, and then he describes the footprint. The photograph you have here is not of the footprint in Adams Peak, because that is covered up, but is actually of a copy of the print which you find in Kurnagala and which I went to and I saw. You will notice that they throw coins today in the footprint, and Ibn Battuta says even then, the 14th century, people threw money, they threw gold, they threw gems, and the Muslim fakirs were allowed to collect them and use them for their stay while they were here. When he goes south, he visits this magnificent 1 kilometer long Devinora temple, which the Portuguese unfortunately destroyed. So what you have are these remnants of these rock pillars. He says that the idol was made out of gold and it was as large as a man, that it had red eyes, rubies for its eyes, which shone so bright that ships could see it from the sea. He says that there were 500 dancing girls who danced every night in front of the idol, and that there were 1,000 priests. So from there, he goes on to Gaul, where he stays with the ship captain Ibrahim. And this is another Ibrahim. And then he goes to Colombo, and Colombo is ruled by a sea pirate, but he calls him Emir of the Sea. Other people call him a sea pirate. His name is Jalasti, or Marinolli, the priest who visited him later, calls him Koya Jan, the Malay ruler. And he had 500 Abyssinian slaves to guard him. And I was very curious to know why they were Abyssinians. So apparently, the The Abyssinians in the medieval times were the guards of the sea. They were maritime guards who were employed as mercenaries. He then finally goes back to Putlam. He meets Arya Chakravarti. He thanks him, and then he boards his ship and heads back to India. And from then on, he continues on to China. So now I bring you on. Let me see how I'm doing for time. Okay. I bring you on to my travels in Ibn Battuta's footsteps. So while Ibn Battuta's trip was peppered, with these fantastic stories of elephants and of rubies and of the Devi Noor idol, my tales, the fantastic tales I was told and I heard, were almost solely concentrated on the spiritual, but in my opinion, yet no less fantastic. So I bring you here. This is Jailani, and Jailani is a very spiritual place for Muslims. It's situated in the hill country. The Sinhala name for the town is called Kuragala. The shrine is located on top of a rock, and it is a legend that Abdul Qadir Jailani, the Sufi mystic, came and meditated here for 11 years and then he disappeared. Where you see this devotee meditating is reputed to be the place where Abdul Qadir Jailani meditated. He wouldn't have had a mesh protecting him. This is the view that he would have seen. You have the same devotee showing me the underside of this rock, which is supposed to have another footprint, not Adam's footprint, but another footprint. And Ibn Battuta was also fascinated by footprints. He documents footprints of Moses, of Abraham, of the Caliph Ali, of the Prophet Muhammad. So he was interested in the footprints, in the holy footprints all over the world. The pilgrim, the devotee, in fact, I would say he was ascetic of sorts. On the right side below, had been meditating at Jailani or Kuragala for the past 33 years. But when I last went, he was no longer there. So he's either gone away or he's gone to a better world. And I want to show you this, and I will read a passage from relating to this scene as well. So this is every year in Jailani, the Rifai Babas, which are a Sufi branch of the Qadiris, the Qadiri Sufi branch, have a festival. And in that festival, they stay for a month on top of the rock and they pray. And then through the night, they sing devotional songs, they get into a trance, and then they engage in extreme forms of devotion, of cutting, of piercing, and of walking on fire. So the passage I would like to read, and I'd like you to actually look at the images while I read, because it will evoke the atmosphere. As I climbed down the steps, my mind went back to my first visit, which was for the annual festival, or Kanduri, held at the Rock in 2005. As we crested the entrance hill, we saw hundreds of pilgrims who had been camped out over a month to pray and celebrate the saint. In the evening, lights were strung from tree to tree. A blind old woman sang a hymn of praise, and everywhere you saw a throng of humanity. Men and women, old and young, town and country, armed with children, babies, and the elderly, all here to honor and praise Abdul Qadir Jailani. In the night, we watched the Babas, or dervishes, perform the Rifai Ratib under their Khalifa, or leader. Each Baba had a tambourine, which was played in unison while chanting prayers. Beginning slowly and rhythmically, they gradually increased the pace, working towards a hypnotic, frantic climax, after which some Babas engaged in extreme expressions of faith and devotion by using rusty knives, skewers, and bamboo spikes to cut themselves. When I was a young child, my mother described a ceremony that had been performed when she was a child to give thanks after she recovered from a life-threatening illness. My sister and I stood transfixed as she described the sheet being placed over a man who was cut in two with a sword, but who afterwards became whole with the power of prayer. It was called the Vettukutti Ratib, which translates from the Tamil into cut and pierce hymn. In modern times, the ceremony has become rare. Muslim homes have ceased to hold such practices, and so it became just a fantastic story for me. When I was watching the ceremony at Jailani for the first time, I remembered my mother's story. The ceremony was long and elaborate, and even today, fragments of those images are seared into my brain. Even then, while watching the ritual, I realized that with or without the Sinhala Buddhist opposition, this practice was in danger. Some members of the audience were unsympathetic to the religious aspect of the ceremony and saw it purely as entertainment, perhaps even circus. A few small stones were thrown into the center that night, but the Baba did not seem perturbed. It was only the next morning, when we visited the Babas again, that we discovered the harassment had continued throughout the night. Their quota of milk had been stolen, and their ingredients of the feast they were to cook for lunch had been tampered with. It's the Wahhabis, they told us philosophically. They don't like us. They don't think this is Islam. I'll go on to my next fantastic story. So this is in Ratnapura. This mosque is the Jannat Jumma Mosque, and Ratnapura is situated at the base of Adams Peak. So this is where you start the climb from one of the paths to start the climb. And so we were told to go to the Jannat Mosque and to talk to people. And maybe with speaking there, the trustees were they said, we cannot ask you inside the mosque, because the mosque has been now taken over by the Wahhabis, and they don't like us talking to people. So we sat outside, in the courtyard, and they were telling us the history of the mosque, and it's a fantastic tale related to these graves. So the story is that there was a Muslim medicine man, an Unani, who lived in Gaul. And then he had a dream that was told to come up the river and he would see a fantastic tree. When he saw the tree, he was to stop, disembark, and he would discover what he was sent there for. So, being a good Muslim, and he followed the dream, he took the boat up the Kaluganga, Black River. And then when he was going up, on the banks, he saw this amazing banyan tree. It was so amazing, he knew this must be the tree. So he disembarked, and then he came across 41 of these graves. And the story is that these 41 pilgrims came from Iraq. They went up Adams Peak, they did the pilgrimage, they came down, and they decided to meditate at the bottom of this tree. Then they passed away. One pilgrim was a woman, and the mosque is named after her, Jannat Bibi. The tree that they are buried around is a banyan tree, but is reputed to have miraculous properties. So because it has miraculous properties, its leaves are prized, and actually the tree is not flourishing because people are coming and plucking the leaves and using it for medicinal purposes. Of the 41 graves, these are the only two that are still in existence, because either the others just disintegrated or they tiled over it. But we had a small miracle that happened to us, because this shrine had been closed for 25 years. When we were leaving, I noticed a fierce looking man walking up and down, kind of wanting to know what we were talking about. And as we were leaving, without saying a word, he beckoned us to the gate, to a locked gate, took out a big key, opened it, and told us to go down the stairs. And apparently, we were the first visitors to go after 25 years, because the Wahhabis do not agree with these shrine worship or shrine reverence. They had locked the shrine up, and we were the first visitors to go there in 25 years. So for me, it's a very special trip as well. And then, we have even more fantastic stories, the graves of Adam and Eve. So this is in Mannar. Mannar was where the pearl fisheries were sited. And I had read a passing reference in a guidebook of the graves of Adam and Eve being in Mannar. And I decided that I was going to go and look for them. My first trip there was in 2004 during the ceasefire of the war. And it was a very difficult time to travel, but my husband and I and two other friends we went up there, and my Tamil is very rusty. And since the Muslims had been expelled from the area, there were no Muslims to ask any directions. I began asking the Tamil people around, do you know about the graves of Adam and Eve? Many people thought I was stark raving mad. But I went into a Hindu Kobil, and actually I used the Arabic terms for it. I said, do you know anything about the graves of Adam and Hawa? And when I said that, immediately the priest, the Pusari, said, yes, actually, I do know where it is. He gave me complicated directions, and this is the shrine. So the story here is that there were a group of fishermen who went out to sea, and they saw a big box floating in the middle of the ocean. They tried to retrieve it, thinking it was some loot from a wrecked ship, but the box started moving away from them. When they came back, they spoke to the next lot of fishermen going out to sea, and they happened to be Muslims. They said, will you go and try to retrieve the box? According to the Muslim fishermen, when they went out to sea, the box, instead of moving away from them, moved towards them. When they brought the box to shore, they discovered two beautifully preserved bodies of a man and a woman. So they buried them with due respect, and they went back to their homes. The leading fisherman had a dream after about a week, where the two people who had been buried introduced themselves as Adam and Eve and said, we do not like where you have buried us, because lots of people are coming and drinking and carousing the night away. We will tell you exactly where to bury us. And they gave directions to this location. Ever since then, so the bodies were buried. I have noticed in Sri Lanka, the saints, the Muslim saints' shrines are really long. Maybe I find it hard to believe they are actually that size, but maybe it's to denote their great stature in society. So today people come and they make vows at the graves. Generally, it is to get a child. And when the child is born, they bring the child and they place the child against the shrine as thanks. And my last story is a mosque back again in the hills. We journey back again to the hills. And this mosque is called the Kahatapitiya Mosque. And it too has a fantastic story. So the mosque was located in the royal Kitul. Kitul is a kind of palm where you get jaggery. So the royal Kitul palm plantation. And there was a man meditating under one of the palm trees when the royal toddy tapper came to climb the trees and get toddy. So he asked, very politely, he asked this, mendicant to stop meditating and to move, but he was deep in meditation. The royal toddy tapper got angry with him and cut off his nose and cut off his ears and went back in a temper back to court. The next day he came and he found that the same mendicant was there, still meditating, and he was completely whole. There was no disfigurement in his face. So he rushes back to court and tells the king, you have to come and see this. The king comes, and the king treats the meditating man with due respect. And he says, what do you want? And the meditating man says, I have finished the pilgrimage to Adam's Peak. I would like to sit here and meditate under this tree and have a view of the peak. So the king says, definitely, I'll let you do that. He says, take as much land as you want. But the man says, no, I just want enough of land that my tasbih or rosary can cover. Now, a tasbih is just the size of a rosary. So the king is a bit shocked. He says, no, please take more. The man says, no, it's just enough what this tasbih covers. King says, okay, fine. And then the holy man throws his tasbih up into the air, which promptly breaks and covers acres and acres. So this mosque is built there. The second miracle about this story is that when the British were building the railway tracks, the mosque was right in the path of the track. The British engineer came, he measured, he discussed, and he decided the shrine was going to have to be moved. It's going to be broken down. The grave was going to be moved a few feet away. That night, the British engineer had a dream. And the holy man said, please don't destroy my shrine. Please let me be here. And it must have moved the British engineer so much that this is the only part of the track where there's a bend in the track. And so I bring you now to the end of my journey, which is the salt fields of Putlam, white gold as we call it. And this is where Ibn Battuta began his journey. It's where I began my journey. And now this is where I leave you with my presentation.
Thank you, Ameena, for such an insightful and riveting presentation. It was really marvelous to hear of all the stories, Ibn Battuta and the elephants and the big rubies and the emirs and all of that. But equally important was your journey and your travels in Sri Lanka and visiting all the places that he visited. So there's a few questions from the audience. If so, someone asked, what sparked your interest in Ibn Battuta originally?
So in school, we had learned of the travelers, the famous travelers who had come to Sri Lanka. And you have Fasien and you have Vajirabodhi, you have Marco Polo, of course, and then you have Ibn Battuta. But because, so I'd always known Ibn Battuta had come, but I actually didn't know much about him. It was very difficult to get his book and nobody else knew anything. It was that sign, that road sign that sparked my interest in that, oh my goodness, if he's honored in this way, then I have to know more about him. And what about I try to track his journey?
Okay.
Also in my research, I was really struck that Ibn Battuta had been to all our countries. He has been to Pakistan, he has been to India, he has been to Bangladesh, he has been to the Maldives. So in South Asia, he traveled quite extensively, and I think that's it's quite a fabulous feat for one man to have traveled to all these countries and to have written so extensively about them.
Okay, thank you for that. There's someone else who said, thank you for the enlightening talk. I wanted to inquire who had sponsored the entire travel. Was it the state of Morocco or the costly gifts he received from the local kings?
You mean Ibn Battuta?
Yeah, not
Yeah.
you.
So Ibn Battuta left Morocco as a pauper, but he was a social climber. And so what he would do is because he was a jurist, and judges, Islamic judges, were a very valuable commodity because not everybody was learned. So he would immediately go to the court and introduce himself. There's a very amusing story about how he gets access to the court. So apparently, you have to ply the court with gifts. You get gifts and give them to the king. The king assesses the cost of the gift, and then he rewards you with even more. So there's a kind of trade that evolves where in today's terms, you will call it outright bribery. But those days, that was the way you traveled, that was the way you negotiated.
Because you even mentioned that in one of the countries that he visited, he was offered a post, a very high post, by the king. So
Yeah,
that's
so in Delhi, he was a chief judge there, and it was actually the Delhi Sultan, Tughlaq, who sponsored his trip to China. But Ibn Battuta was prone to a lot of mishaps. So what happened was when he went to the south of India, he lost all the gifts that he was, and they were magnificent gifts. He was too frightened to go back to Sultan Tughlaq and tell him, I have lost these gifts. So that's why he went to maybe Maldives. That's why he came to Sri Lanka. And when he came to Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan king gave him ambergris and gave him pearls and gave him rubies and gave him slave girls. So he did not go every country he visited, he went with even more.
okay. That's interesting. But I think one of the things that you might have actually may have missed out, maybe I don't haven't read your book, but in your presentation at least, did he have any children to carry on his legacy? Because he was notorious for marrying women in every country he went to. So
Virtually. He did
would you
have
like
children. He did have children, but he does not name he does not mention any of the girl children except one. And he says that that child was very lucky for him. That girl child was born to a slave girl and was very lucky for him. And then but the child died when the child was 2 years old. A very amusing incident about a child is that when he went to the Maldives, he had a boy child. Then he left, and on his way back, he went back to the Maldives again to take the child with him. But the mother of the child did not want to give him the child. And I don't know whether he felt he was getting into some sort of trouble in the Maldives if he insisted to take the child or whatever. But he says it in his book. He doesn't give details. He says, well, at the last minute, I changed my mind and I left the child with the mother and went off. So I think all of us, like they say, more than half the planet have got Genghis Khan's genes. Maybe a fair number of us have got Ibn Battuta's genes.
That could be true. I mean, that's an interesting thought. Um, so I guess that's a good note to end on. Would you like to say anything else?
No, thank you very much. I hope all of you will be able to, at some point, be able to read my book. And I hope that I hope even more that I'll be able to come to Lahore and actually attend the festival sometime in the future. Thank you
We
so
would
much, Emma.
love to have you in Lahore. And for Ameena's book, I will provide a link down below. You can request it at Liberty Books. They will order it for you, inshallah. And best of luck, Ameena, with everything. And hopefully, inshallah, see you in Lahore the next time we see each other. It won't be virtual, it should be
It
physical.
should, yeah. Inshallah, we say. Inshallah, as we say.
Okay, have a good
Okay.
night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.